Hi there, my name's Stella, and welcome to Midnight Club, a podcast dedicated to the dark and disturbing. Oftentimes, I have a hard time sleeping at night, and I find myself looking into all kinds of different things, but I always gravitate towards things of a darker nature, like serial killers, murderers, and the story behind the disappeared. I always want to know the backstory, the person behind the crimes. I want to know the psychology, the mentality, the circumstances that drove them to do what they did. Not necessarily as an excuse, no, that's not what it is. I just want to understand. And so, in today's episode, we will be looking at one Luis Garavito, notoriously known as La Bestia de Colombia, or the Beast of Colombia. Back in the 50s, Colombia was raging war in itself, and people were dying on both sides. It's believed to have resulted in over 200,000 deaths. A period known as La Violencia, or the violence. It was during these times that Garavito was born, on the 25th of January 1957. His mother was a prostitute, and his father a violent alcoholic. Now you know that's a recipe for disaster. It was during those formative years that Garavito would endure physical, mental, sexual abuse, and torture, all before starting first grade. His father would just beat him, his siblings, his mother, in these fits of violent rage. But it gets worse. At times his father would force Garavito to watch his mother service her clients. Other times he would allow the clients to sexually abuse and molest the little boy. Innocence was lost in the darkness. Okay, let's pause there. Let's think about that for just a second. We're talking about a child who had to endure this kind of mental, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. The possible diagnosis he would have if we went to a psychotherapist and told them his history, what do you think it would be? PTSD, depression, anxiety, adjustment disorder? I'm barely through half of the first page, and this is the kind of history this person has. But there's more. Sadly, there's more. Eventually, he ran away from home. Of course, who wouldn't? He sought a reprieve from the literal torture he was enduring at home, so he took to the streets and tried his hand at etching out a living out there. At the age of 8, Garavito was found by a pedophile. The man led the little boy to an abandoned home where he sexually assaulted him. He wasn't safe at home. He wasn't safe out in the streets. Literally a child, vulnerable to the whole world. It's just a recipe for disaster. A few days later, he would join a street gang. In this, he found a pseudo-family where he got the protection and sense of security that his childhood lacked. Together, these boys, they stole food, money, and cars, surviving his teenage years just long enough to grow up and start working. Now, as you can imagine, the job market for someone with no education, no family support, literally homeless on the streets, would be unforgiving. The few jobs he did qualify for often required him to travel a lot and always looking for the next job opportunity. Although he moved frequently, Garavito had a girlfriend. Her name was Teresa, and she lived with her small child. Now, let's take a look at his crimes. From 1992 to 1999, over a span of 7 years, Garavito roamed the countries of Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela, targeting only young boys. His oldest known victim, aged 16. The youngest, 6. These boys were a reflection of his own past. They were despondent. They were homeless peasants, orphan boys just roaming the streets. No one to notice if they just disappeared. He would use disguises to trick them. He would dress up as a priest, a street vendor, a drug dealer. He took advantage of his position as an adult to offer his kindness and goodwill, offering them food, money, or work. After gaining their trust, he would lure them to a secluded location in the countryside, where the monster of Colombia was born. He would walk his victims until they were too tired to fight back, where he would bind them, strip them, torture, rape, decapitate, and mutilate his victims. Their tiny bodies often bearing bite marks. They told a sad story of prolonged horror and inconceivable pain. Now, let's pause there. This, believe it or not, is the PG-13 version of what I found online. You can find descriptions of what happened and what he did in graphic detail. Now, I want you to keep that in mind as we go into the numbers. Because not only did this person murder a great number of people, but we couple that with the way that he did it. We're talking about someone that is so deeply disturbed. Now, let's take a look at the investigation and subsequent arrest. I think it had to do with the Civil War, that there were so many destitute, homeless people roaming the street. A great number of them were actually children. How and why is mind-boggling to me. Is it that the families couldn't afford them to care for them? There was no work. They would send them off. Like, what was going on? I did a lot of research on that part. I really, really wanted to understand how so many children aged 8, 9, 10 are just on the streets of this big city in the middle of a civil war. But anyway, beginning in 1992, these boys began to disappear from the streets. Garavito was around 35 years old at this time. I think that it was due to a lack of resources. No infrastructure, no database, no missing persons reports. Nothing was done over these clusters of bodies, leaving Garavito to continue on his murderous spree for 5 years. That was until 1987, when a mass grave was uncovered. This discovery outraged the nation and pressured authorities to mobilize and formally launch an investigation. Even with the police mobilizing and trying to figure out what that was going on with this mass grave, it still took them a year. For an entire year after this mass grave was discovered, the investigation lost momentum, it stalled, it hit a dead end, it went nowhere. Mind you, Garavito was still committing his crimes during this year, after finding this mass grave. So fast forward, it's now February 1988. Just outside of the town of Genova, the bodies of 2 naked children were found laying next to each other on a wooded hill. The very next day, a short distance away, another naked child was found. All 3 bodies were bound and bore signs of sexual abuse, torture, and bite marks, similar to all the bodies that had been found over the last 7 years. Now, this scene was not unlike the dozens and dozens and dozens of other clusters of bodies that had been found. But the break in the case came in the form of a little slip of paper that had been found at the crime scene. Scrawled on this note was an address. Of course, the police followed the lead. They showed up at this address to the doorstep of a home of a woman named Teresa and her small child. This tiny piece of paper proved invaluable. Teresa, after being interrogated, admitted that she had not seen her boyfriend in months. However, he did leave behind a bag. Inside, they found pictures of young boys, personal journals detailing his deprived acts, and your common household bills, like an electric bill or a phone bill. It's a nothing piece of paper, but it gave them a name, Luis Garavito, and an address. Of course, police rushed over. They went over to this address listed on this bill, but sadly they found the residence had been empty for months. Now, the police had some theories. Either he was away looking for work, or he was away looking for his next victim. Either way, they found themselves at another dead end. As fortune would have it, the universe wouldn't have to wait very long for justice. The unforgiving streets follow a code. You mind your own business, and you keep your head low. The world is full of unsung heroes and courageous souls. 2 days after visiting the empty home, on the 22nd of April, 1999, a homeless man saw 2 people struggling. After noticing one of them was just a child, he mustered the courage to intervene, stopping the assault and enabling the police to arrest the perpetrator. At the time of the arrest, Garavito gave a false name, so the police had no idea who they had in their hands. After analyzing the assault, interviewing the little boy, the homeless man, and this perpetrator, they made some connections. They wanted to see if this unknown perpetrator could be the Luis Garavito they were looking for. So they presented the bag with the pictures, journal, and the bill. And Garavito broke down and gave a full confession, just like that. I had a hard time understanding why this confession came as it did. All of the research that I did, I couldn't find how they were able to extract this confession besides presenting him with this evidence. But something tells me that other methods were used to persuade him to admit to his crimes. Regardless, the confession was obtained. Now, the Colombian Justice Department didn't think that it would be enough just to have a confession. They wanted more. They found about 11 pieces of evidence that they wanted to try to connect Garavito to. The list included DNA found on victims' bodies, a unique pair of glasses, empty liquor bottles, underwear, and shoes. Since he had been booked and charged for assault on the boy, Garavito was in custody, and plans were made to get the evidence they needed. Everyone in the jail was forced to take an eye exam as to not raise suspicion that they were only trying to get Garavitos. But once they had him out of his cell, officials collected DNA from various items inside and matched it with the crime scene. Now, this is where I think it's a little confusing. He already gave a confession, right? So why are they trying to be all sneaky with getting his DNA? I just find that strange. Yeah, I think it's weird. It's weird that they would go about doing it that way, like trying to be sneaky about it. Like, why? Oh, why are you trying to be sneaky about it? The guy confessed. He said he did it. You open his mouth and you take a swab. But instead, they're like forcing everyone to take this eye exam because these one glasses are very specific and only one person could possibly have it. And it's just such a long way of trying to get this match. But at any rate, it was a match. And in the end, Garavito was convicted of 138 counts of murder. The dictionary defines the word prolific as present in large numbers or quantities, plentiful. I find that word very interesting when we're talking about this topic. Murderers, serial killers that disappeared, prolific. The most prolific serial killer. And then, depending on which channel you're watching, YouTuber or documentary, it's always a different person. How can they all be prolific? And so, after conducting some research, I figured it out. It just depends. Depends on what you are counting. To that effect, I offer you 3 categories. First up, possible murders, as in the perpetrator claimed or confessed to a murder, but for whatever reason, there was not enough evidence to prosecute. Pedro Alonso Lopez, 350 possible victims. Luis Garavito, 300 possible victims. Harold Shipman, 250 possible victims. Next, we have proven murders, as in the perpetrator claimed or confessed to a murder, and authorities had enough information to hold it towards the victim count, but for whatever reason did not prosecute. I found that this proven section was oftentimes the serial killer taking authorities to the location of bodies, and they would be able to recover these bodies. And so they're proven to be theirs, but for XYZ reason, it just wasn't prosecuted. Harold Shipman, 218 proven victims. Luis Garavito, 138 proven victims. Pedro Alonso Lopez, 110 proven victims. And lastly, convicted, as in the perpetrator confessed and authorities had enough evidence to take to trial and convict him of the following counts. Luis Garavito, convicted, 138 counts of murder. Harold Shipman, convicted, 15 counts of murder. Pedro Alonso Lopez, convicted, 3 counts of murder. Now let's pause here. Let these numbers sink in. The number of possible, the number of proven, the number of convicted. It's so broken. Any way that you look at it, spin it, justify it. Look at Pedro Alonso Lopez. He claims to have killed 350. Remember, possible is that they said it. They said that they killed this many people. Proven just means that those bodies were found. They could prove that that's how many it was. Even at 110 proven victims, he was only convicted of 3. What punishment can be dished out that would make anything okay or better or livable for those victims that paid the consequences of a broken society? And the families that had no other choices or didn't know how to cope or were themselves traumatized. We look back at his mother and his father, the prostitute and the drunk. Why was he always drunk? What was he running away from? What trauma did he endure? Why was the mother a prostitute? What other job could she have taken? What other thing, skill, talent did she have that could have made money for the family, for them to eat? Such a sad situation. Colombia law does not believe in life sentences, nor do they carry the death penalty. Like, it doesn't exist. They don't have those punishments. Not only that, but they limit imprisonment to not surpass a total of 40 years. Like, there's a cap to how much time a person can spend in prison, and that's 40. For his crimes, with an estimated 300 possible victims, he was sentenced to 1,853 years and 9 days. Because Garavito assisted the police in finding the victims' bodies, his sentence reduced to only serve a total of 22 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2023. La Bestia de Colombia continues to confess to more murders.